the search for the Rosicrucians, alchemists, mystics, and the invisible college. Imagine waking up one morning to find your city transformed, not by war or fire or plague but by a whisper, promise, a secret society announcing its presence, not with a proclamation from a king's herald, but with enigmatic posters pasted on the cold, damp walls of buildings in the dead of night. They claimed to be immortal. They claimed to hold the secrets of transmutation, of healing, of a universal truth that could mend a broken world. They called themselves the Brotherhood of the Rosy Cross. And then, just as suddenly as they appeared, they vanished, leaving behind a storm of hope, fear, and a question that has haunted the corridors of history for 400 years. Were the Rosicrucians real? Or were they just a beautiful, dangerous dream? This is a story that exists in the twilight between fact and fiction. A sleepy tale of alchemists, mystics, and invisible colleges. A story that begins not with a bang, but with a piece of paper and an idea so powerful it would help shape the modern world, even if its authors never truly existed at all. History is not always found in the thunder of cannons or the proclamations of kings. Sometimes, its most profound currents move in silence, carried on a whisper. Sometimes, the event that defines an age is not an event at all, but a rumor, an absence, a question mark scrawled in the margins of a city's diary. To find the heart of our story, we must travel to Paris. But not the Paris of postcards and revolutions, of grand boulevards and gleaming lights. We must go back further, to the year 1623. Imagine this Paris. It is a city of sharp, jarring contrasts, a crucible of the sacred and the profane. The air, thick with the smoke of wood fires and the stench of the Seine, carries the peal of 1,000 church bells. But it also carries the memory of violence. The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, a scar of religious slaughter, is still within living memory for the city's elders. The fragile peace of the Edict of Nantes has held for a generation, but it is a peace born of exhaustion, not reconciliation. The tensions between Catholic and Huguenot simmer just beneath the surface, a constant, low fever in the body politic. This is a city of shadows and light. In the halls of the Sorbonne, the sharpest minds of Europe debate the nature of God and reality, wrestling with the philosophies of Aristotle. Yet in the twisting alleyways of the Marais, alchemists toil in secret laboratories, their faces illuminated by the green glow of their alembics, searching for the philosopher's stone. Astrologers chart the heavens for kings and merchants alike, their predictions holding the weight of state secrets. It is a world teetering on a precipice, caught between the fading embers of the medieval age and the uncertain dawn of the modern. Faith is still absolute, but the first whispers of a new kind of reason are beginning to be heard. Superstition is rampant, but so is a burning, insatiable curiosity. Into this paranoid, fervent, and deeply anxious city, during the cold, damp weeks of Lent in 1623, a ghost arrives. It does not come with a rattling of chains or a spectral apparition. It comes on pieces of paper. It began quietly. A baker, rising before dawn to stoke his ovens, might have been the first to see it. Or perhaps a student, stumbling home after a long night of wine and debate. Or a watchman, completing his final, weary patrol. There, pasted to the city's walls at crossroads on market pillars, near the gates of the university, were strange, handwritten placards. They were not official decrees. They bore no royal seal. They were anonymous, audacious, and utterly baffling. The text was brief, yet its claims were cosmic in scale. One version read, "We, the deputies of the main college of the Brethren of the Rosy Cross, are making a visible and invisible stay in this city, by the grace of the Most High, towards whom the hearts of the just turn. We show and teach how to speak the languages of all countries where we wish to be, and how to draw men from error and from death. Let us pause and feel the weight of these words on the mind of a 17th century Parisian. This is not a simple advertisement. It is a challenge to the very fabric of reality. We, the deputies of the main college." The language is deliberate. Deputies implies they are merely representatives of a larger, more powerful body. College suggests not a rabble of mystics, but an organized, learned institution, a secret university. This is a claim of structure, of hierarchy, of a hidden authority that parallels the established powers of the church and the state. Making a visible and invisible stay in this city. This is the masterstroke of psychological manipulation. It is a paradox that is impossible to disprove. If you see them, they are visible. If you do not, they are simply choosing to be invisible. Their absence becomes a confirmation of their power. They are everywhere and nowhere, a spectral presence woven into the very air of Paris. They turn the entire city into a stage for their mysterious game, and every citizen into an unwitting participant. We show and teach how to speak the languages of all countries where we wish to be. To a world where travel was slow, dangerous, and limited, this is a claim of near-divine power. It suggests not just linguistic fluency, but a kind of instantaneous transport, a mastery over space itself. It is the power of angels or perhaps of demons. And how to draw men from error and from death. Here is the ultimate promise. To draw men from error, a promise of absolute truth, a key to unlock the riddles of the universe, a deliverance from the endless, bloody theological disputes that had torn Europe apart, and to draw men from death, a claim of immortality, or at least of a life extended beyond all natural limits. It is the promise of the philosopher's stone, of the elixir of life, whispered not in a dusty alchemical tome, but shouted from the very walls of the capital. The city did not know what to make of it, and in that uncertainty a kind of madness took hold. The Rosicrucians, this rose-cross brotherhood, became an obsession. The placards were a stone thrown into the still, dark pond of Parisian society, and the ripples spread everywhere. In the taverns and public houses the talk was of miracles and magic. Were they the advance guard of the Antichrist? Or were they divine messengers, come to heal a broken world? People began to look at their neighbors with suspicion. Could that quiet German scholar, or that reclusive Italian physician, be one of them? Every foreigner, every man of learning, every eccentric, fell under a cloud of speculation. Some citizens reportedly left their beds unmade and their windows open at night, hoping to entice an invisible brother to visit and share his secrets. Others barred their doors, terrified of a demonic intrusion. In the glittering, paranoid court of King Louis XIII, the affair was viewed with deep alarm. An invisible international secret society, claiming supernatural powers and allegiance only to the Most High, was a direct threat to the absolute authority of the crown. Cardinal Richelieu, then rising to the height of his power, was a man who despised secrets he did not control. For him, an invisible college was an invisible conspiracy, a potential network of spies and subversives that needed to be exposed and crushed. The Church naturally reacted with fury. The Archbishop of Paris and the powerful theologians of the Sorbonne saw the placards as a profound blasphemy. The claims of the Rosicrucians to heal, to grant wisdom, to offer a form of salvation were a direct usurpation of the Church's role as the sole intermediary between God and man. This was not just heresy, it was a rival franchise. A Jesuit polemicist named François Garras thundered against them, declaring them to be agents of Satan, masters of illusion, sent to lead the faithful to damnation. The whispers on the walls had ignited a war of words. Paris was inundated with what we would now call a viral media event. The printing presses, a relatively new and powerful technology, ran hot day and night, churning out a deluge of pamphlets. It was a cacophony of opinion, a battle for the soul of the city fought on cheap paper. Some pamphlets defended the mysterious brethren, hailing them as the harbingers of a new golden age. Titles like The Admirable Discourses of the Philosophers of the Rosy Cross appeared, penned by anonymous authors who claimed to be sympathetic to their cause. They presented the brotherhood as true Christians, inheritors of an ancient, prelapsarian wisdom, come to reform science, medicine, and religion. But for every hopeful pamphlet, there were a dozen filled with terror and condemnation. Works like The Frightful Pacts Made Between the Devil and the Pretended Invisibles painted a horrifying picture of a diabolical cult. They accused the Rosicrucians of witchcraft, of orgies, of political assassination plots. These pamphlets screamed the secret puppet masters behind the Protestant Reformation, a fifth column of Lucifer himself. Among the intellectuals, the reaction was one of intense, and sometimes desperate, curiosity. The most famous searcher was a young man then living in Paris, a philosopher and mathematician who would one day change the world with a single, simple phrase, cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. His name was René Descartes. Descartes was the very embodiment of the new, emerging spirit of rational inquiry. And yet, he was fascinated. This rumor of a secret brotherhood possessing a universal science was too tantalizing to ignore. He later wrote that he searched diligently for any man in Paris who claimed to be one of the deputies, or who even knew one. He sought them out in the salons, in the libraries, among the city's community of German scholars. He applied his methodical mind to the problem of finding the invisible, and he found nothing, not a single person. He concluded, with a touch of dry wit, that if the Rosicrucians were indeed invisible, they had chosen a good place to hide, for he could find no trace of them whatsoever. His inability to find them became, for many, a powerful piece of evidence that they simply did not exist. Another great mind of the age, the scholar and librarian Gabriel Naud, took a different approach. Naud was a skeptic, a debunker, a man who believed that knowledge should be public and rational. He saw the Rosicrucian craze as a dangerous outbreak of public delusion. He penned a scathing and influential critique titled Instruction to France on the Truth of the History of the Brethren of the Rosy Cross. In it, he systematically dismantled the legend, arguing that the whole affair was a comical and ridiculous prank. He traced the origins of the myth back to Germania, crucial insight we will return to. For Naud, the danger was not the Rosicrucians themselves, whom he believed to be imaginary, but the public's willingness to believe in them. It was a sickness of the mind, a surrender to fantasy that threatened the project of reason. Then, just as the furor seemed to be at its peak, the affair took a darker turn. A second set of placards appeared. Their tone was different. The initial invitation, with its lofty promises, was gone. It was replaced by something more ominous, a warning. These new posters read, "If anyone is curious to see us, out of curiosity alone, he will never communicate with us. But if his will really and in fact carries him to enroll in our fellowship, we who are judges of intentions will cause him to see the truth of our promises, to the point that we make no public profession of our location in this city, yet the thoughts of the reader, attached to the real will of the speaker, will be capable of making us known to him and him to us." The message was chilling. It shifted the burden entirely onto the seeker. We are judges of intentions. They claimed the ability to read minds. If you searched for them with a pure heart, a real will, you would find them. But if you were merely curious, if you were a skeptic, a government agent, a hostile priest, your search would be fruitless. And who could ever be certain of their own deepest intentions? It was the perfect defense. Any failure to make contact was not their fault, but the seekers. It was a spiritual catch-22. This second poster effectively weaponized their invisibility, turning it from a curious novelty into a tool of psychological judgment. The whisper on the walls was no longer just a promise. It was also a threat. It implied that those who sought them with impure hearts might not just fail, but could be subject to some unseen retribution. The spectral brotherhood now had a judgmental, almost divine quality. And then silence. As mysteriously as the affair had begun, it ended. No deputies of the Rosy Cross ever revealed themselves. No one was publicly initiated. No secret knowledge was dispensed. The invisible brotherhood simply dissolved back into the Parisian air. The frenzy subsided. The pamphleteers moved on to new controversies. The city, having been captivated by this phantom for several intense months, slowly forgot. The great Rosicrucian scare of 1623 was over. But what did it leave behind? It left no monuments, no disciples, no tangible proof that the brethren had ever set foot in Paris. It left only a story, a ghost story for the intellectual world. The Paris affair was the moment the Rosicrucian myth exploded from a niche interest among German scholars into a full-blown European phenomenon. It demonstrated the terrifying power of an idea, the speed at which a rumor could travel and warp the perceptions of an entire city. It revealed a deep, collective hunger in the heart of the 17th century, a hunger for certainty, for hidden power, for a secret way out of the chaos of the age. The placards on the walls of Paris were not the beginning of our story. They were, in fact, the dramatic climax of a story that had begun almost a decade earlier, in a series of obscure and brilliant documents printed in a divided Germany. The Paris affair was the loud, public echo of a much quieter, stranger whisper from across the Rhine. To understand who or what was truly behind the placards that so terrified and enthralled Paris, we must now leave the City of Lights and travel back into the heart of the Holy Roman Empire, to a land on the brink of war, and to the strange allegorical tale that started it all. The legend of a man named Christian Rosenkreuz. The whisper on the walls of Paris was an echo, a loud, sharp report that reverberated through the capitals of Europe. But to understand an echo, you must first find the source of the sound. To understand the panic and the fervor of 1623, we must travel backwards in time and eastwards in geography. We leave behind the frantic energy of France and journey into the heart of a fractured and expectant Germany, nearly a decade earlier. Our destination is not a specific place, but a specific object, a small, unassuming book. It appeared around the year 1614, first in manuscript form, then printed in the town of Kassel. It was published anonymously, its author hidden, a ghost behind the printing press. The book's title was the Fama Fraternitatis Rosicrucis, which translates to the fame of the Brotherhood of the Rosy Cross. Or, perhaps more accurately, the rumor of the Brotherhood. And a rumor is precisely what it was. But it was a rumor presented with the solemn gravity of a historical chronicle, a story so detailed, so compelling, that it demanded to be taken as fact. It was not a philosophical treatise, nor a theological argument. It was a biography, the life story of a man who, if he existed, would be one of the most important figures in human history. A man known to us only by his initials, CRC. the father and founder of the Invisible Order, Christian Rosenkreuz. The Fama begins its tale in the year 1378. In a Germany of feudal lords and warring princes, a child is born to a noble family whose glory had long since faded. Their lineage respectable, but their coffers empty. This child, Christian Rosenkreuz, is a paradox from birth. A man of high blood but humble means. His parents, unable to provide the education his brilliant mind clearly required, place him in a monastery at the tender age of 5. In the chilly halls of the cloister, he learns Greek and Latin, absorbing the scriptures and the teachings of the church fathers. But for a mind like his, the monastery is both a sanctuary and a cage. The prescribed knowledge is not enough. He feels a profound yearning for a deeper, more direct understanding of the universe, a wisdom that the dogmas of his time could not provide. His opportunity arrives at the age of 16. A certain brother Piel from the monastery is embarking on the great pilgrimage to the Holy Land. The young Rosenkreuz is permitted to accompany him. But we are immediately told that his motivation is not conventional piety. He is not traveling to Jerusalem to walk in the footsteps of Christ, but to learn from the wise men of the East, whose rumored knowledge captivated his imagination more than any relic or holy site. The journey, however, takes an unexpected turn. His companion dies in Cyprus, leaving the 16-year-old Rosenkreuz alone, a stranger in a strange land. Lesser men would have turned back, but Rosenkreuz, driven by his singular purpose, presses on. He does not head for Jerusalem. Instead, he follows the whispers of a greater prize. He has heard tales of a mythical city in Arabia called Damcar. Damcar, as described in the Fama, is a utopia of knowledge. It is the repository of a pure, ancient wisdom that Europe has lost. The sages of Damcar, we are told, are not sorcerers trafficking in forbidden arts. They are masters of what they call magia and Kabbalah, but these are not the corrupted forms known in Europe. Theirs is a holy science, a perfect harmony between mathematics, physics, medicine, and theology. They understand the secret architecture of creation, the language of nature itself. Upon his arrival, the young German is not treated as an intruder. To his astonishment, he is welcomed as an honored guest, as one whom they had long been expecting. They greet him by name and reveal to him secrets of his past life that no one outside his monastery could possibly have known. The message is clear. His journey was not an accident. He is a man of destiny, a chosen vessel for the knowledge they have guarded for centuries. For 3 years, Christian Rosenkreuz becomes their most devoted student. He translates one of their most sacred texts, the Book M, into Latin. This book is described as a compendium of universal knowledge, a guide to the entire cosmos. He learns the principles of their physics, their mathematics not of the vulgar sort, and their medicine, which is based on a profound understanding of the correspondence between the microcosm, man, and the macrocosm, the universe. After his time in Damcar, his thirst for knowledge still unquenched, he travels to Egypt, where he briefly studies the plants and creatures. From there, he sails to the city of Fez, a great center of learning in the Islamic world. In Fez, he communes with the masters of elemental spirits and learns how to harmonize his life with the rhythms of the cosmos. He is piecing together a universal system, synthesizing the pure magic of Arabia, the natural science of Egypt, and the elemental wisdom of Morocco. At the age of 21, laden with a treasure far greater than any goal to complete, unified theory of everything Christian Rosenkreuz returns to Europe. He is filled with a youthful, righteous zeal. He believes that the learned men of Europe, the scholars in their universities and the leaders of the church, will rejoice at his return. He will present to them his universal reformation, a plan to heal the fractures in European thought, to unite science and faith, and to usher in an age of unprecedented enlightenment and charity. He is met with ridicule. The learned men are portrayed as arrogant, hidebound, and blinded by their own petty jealousies. They laugh at his grand claims. They are too comfortable in their established dogmas, too invested in their own systems of thought, to entertain the idea that a single young man could have discovered a truth greater than all their libraries combined. They are more concerned, the Fama tells us with biting sarcasm, with what is the best way to classify Aristotle. This is the great turning point in the legend. It is the moment of profound disillusionment. Rosenkreuz realizes that the world is not sick because it lacks the truth. It is sick because it is not ready to receive it. Humanity, mired in its greed, its pride, and its intellectual sterility, would only corrupt the pure knowledge he carries. Heartbroken but not defeated, he retreats to his native Germany. He understands now that the Great Reformation cannot be a public proclamation. It must be a secret work, a slow and patient cultivation of the soil before the seed can be planted. The world must be prepared, gently and invisibly. In this solitude, he begins his true life's work. He spends 5 years meditating on his journey, systematizing the vast knowledge he has acquired, and designing the structure for a new kind of society. Then, he seeks out 3 brothers from his original monastery men of piety, skill, and loyalty. With these 3, he founds the first circle of the Fraternity of the Rosicrucians. Together, in a building they construct and name the Sanctus Spiritus, or House of the Holy Spirit, they lay the foundations. They write down the magical language and writing system, and they transcribe the entirety of the Book M and other works of wisdom. As their work grows, they expand the fraternity to a total of 8 members, all bachelors, all sworn to celibacy, ensuring their complete devotion to the great work. When their foundational task is complete, they establish the 6 articles, the sacred oath that will govern their order for all time. These rules are the very heart of the Rosicrucian ethos, a radical departure from the monastic orders and secret societies of the past. First, that none of them should profess any other thing than to cure the sick, and that gratis. Their work was to be one of pure charity, not for profit or fame. Second, that they should not be constrained to wear any certain kind of habit, but therein to follow the custom of the country. This is the rule of invisibility. They were to blend in, to be unseen among the populace, working their good deeds from the shadows. Third, that every year upon the day C, they should meet together at the Sanctus Spiritus. This ensured the continuity and fellowship of the order. Fourth, that every brother should look about for a worthy person who, after his decease, might succeed him. This was the mechanism for the fraternity's immortality. Fifth, the word RC should be their seal, their mark, and their character. And the 6th and final rule, the most important of all, the fraternity should remain secret for 100 years. Having established these rules, the 8 brothers disperse across Europe, 2 remaining with Father CRC, the others traveling to different lands. They are seeds of a new consciousness, planted across the continent, working silently, healing, teaching, and preparing the world for the day their existence can finally be revealed. The Fama then makes a dramatic leap through time. We are told that Christian Rosenkreuz lived to the astonishing age of 106, dying in the year 1484. His death and burial location were kept a closely guarded secret, known only to the first generation of the Brotherhood. 120 years pass. The world changes. Luther nails his theses to the church door. The Renaissance reaches its full flower. The scientific mind begins to stir. And within the Rosicrucian fraternity, now in its 3rd generation, the exact location of the founder's tomb has been lost. Then, one of the brothers, a man described as a skilled architect, decides to make some alterations to the Sanctus Spiritus. While renovating a wall, his tools strike something hard. He discovers a memorial tablet made of brass, hidden beneath the plaster. And on this tablet is an inscription, Post CXX Annos Petibo, after 120 years, I shall open. Beneath it is the year of CRC's death. The prophecy is at hand. With great reverence and excitement, the brothers tear down the wall. Behind it, they find a hidden door. They have stumbled upon the lost tomb, the legendary vault of Christian Rosenkreuz. What they find inside is not a place of death, but a microcosm of the universe, a library of divine knowledge. The description in the Fama is one of the most iconic passages in all of Western esotericism. The vault is a heptagon, a perfect 7-sided chamber. Each of the 7 walls is dedicated to a different field of knowledge, adorned with symbols and figures. And the entire chamber is illuminated not by any window or torch, but by an artificial sun in the Seelingen ever-burning lamp, a symbol of the eternal, inextinguishable light of gnosis, or divine knowledge. In the center of the vault stands a circular altar, upon which are inscribed more cryptic messages, including a motto that reads, "A vacuum exists nowhere," a direct challenge to Aristotelian physics. The brothers realize the altar is not solid. They move it aside, revealing a brass plate. And beneath that plate, they find the body of their founder. He is not a skeleton. He is not a decaying corpse. The body of Christian Rosenkreuz lies in a state of perfect preservation, as if he were merely sleeping. His face is serene, his beard long. He is dressed in the robes of the order, and in his hand, he holds a small but precious parchment scroll, sealed with a golden seal. This, the Fama tells us, is the Book T, which, after the Bible, is the greatest treasure of the entire fraternity. It is their Summa, their most secret and powerful text. The vault is more than a tomb. It is an archive. Around the chamber, they find other secret books, small repeating mirrors, ever-burning lamps, and strange mechanical devices, including singing automata. It is a time capsule of a lost, higher science, a fusion of magic and technology, left by the founder to be discovered at the appointed hour. The discovery of the vault is the signal. The The 120 years of silence are over. The prophecy has been fulfilled. It is now time for the fame of the Brotherhood to be made known. And so, the book concludes with its grand open invitation. The Fama Fraternitatis is this announcement. The brothers, having rediscovered their purpose and their founder's wisdom, now call out to the learned and pious of Europe. They announce the coming of a universal reformation. They condemn the ungodly and accursed practice of gold-making, the profane alchemy of greed, and distinguish it from their own true, spiritual, and medical alchemy. They invite any who reads the Fama with a sincere heart to consider their offer. They ask for no fee, no subscription. They simply ask that interested parties publish their thoughts, and if their intentions are pure, the Brotherhood will find a way to make contact. They promise a new dawn for humanity, guided by their secret wisdom, under the shadow of the wings of Jehovah. This was the story that fell upon the fertile, anxious soil of early 17th century Germany. It was a masterpiece of myth-making. It had everything. A heroic, globe-trotting sage for a protagonist, a quest for ancient wisdom, a secret society of benevolent masters, a critique of the corrupt establishment, a spectacular, magical tomb, and a final, tantalizing promise of initiation into the greatest secrets of the universe. It was a sleepy tale, a dream of a better world whispered into the ear of a waking continent. It was almost certainly a fiction, but it was a fiction that felt more true, more vital, and more hopeful than the grim reality of the world outside. The question that consumed the intellectuals of the age was not simply whether the story was true, but what it meant. Was it an allegory, a political manifesto, a spiritual guide? Or was it, as some would later claim, the most brilliant and dangerous joke ever played on the world? The publication of the Fama was not the end of the Rosicrucian revelation. It was only the beginning. Soon, it would be followed by a second, more aggressive text, a confession and a challenge that would add fuel to the growing fire. A story had been told. A myth had been born. With the publication of the Fama Fraternitatis, a seed of incredible potency was planted in the mind of Europe. The legend of Christian Rosenkreutz and his benevolent, secret brotherhood was a seductive fantasy, a perfect dream for an imperfect time. It offered hope, mystery, and the promise of a world remade. But it also created a deafening silence. The Fama had ended with an open invitation, a call for the worthy to declare themselves. And in response, the learned, the pious, and the curious of Germany began to cry out into the void, publishing letters and treatises addressed to the elusive fraternity. Yet no answer came. The Brotherhood remained as silent and invisible as the story claimed they were. The whisper, having been spoken, seemed to hang in the air, unanswered. For a time, because the anonymous authors behind the legend were not finished. The silence was not theirs to keep. The Fama was not a singular event. It was the opening act. In 1615, just 1 year after the first text began to circulate widely, a second document appeared. It was often printed in the same volume as the Fama, a direct and inseparable companion. It was called the Confessio Fraternitatis, the Confession of the Brotherhood. But what kind of confession was this? It was not an admission of guilt. It was a doubling down, a raising of the stakes. If the Fama had been a captivating story, a gentle invitation whispered from the shadows, the Confessio was a manifesto, a gauntlet thrown down in the public square. It was the whisper becoming a shout. The Confessio is a different beast entirely. Its tone is sharper, more urgent, more philosophical, and far more aggressive. It wastes no time with narrative. It speaks directly to the learned of Europe, and its purpose is threefold: to confirm the reality of the Brotherhood, to clarify its apocalyptic mission, and to issue a stark ultimatum to the world. First, it addresses the budding skeptics head-on. It dismisses those who dismissed the Fama as a mere allegory or a clever fiction. The Brotherhood, it declares with absolute authority, is real. The tomb of the founder is real. Their knowledge is real. They reassure the faithful seeker that their hopes are not in vain, while simultaneously chiding those who would doubt what has been so generously offered. But it is in its philosophical and theological claims that the Confessio truly shows its radical teeth. It frames the Rosicrucian project in explicitly millenarian terms. A great final change is coming to the world, ordained by God himself. We do testify, it proclaims, that the Lord God hath already sent messengers which should testify his will, and that he will send a great reformation. This is no longer just a call for a renewal of arts and sciences. This is prophecy. The authors place themselves at the center of God's plan for the end times. They claim to possess a wisdom more than human, a direct pipeline to divine revelation that has been granted to them, and them alone. They speak of a great book of nature, which they can read as easily as any other text. This book contains all knowledge, and through it, They have learned the secrets of creation's birth and its coming end. And with this divine authority, they launch a blistering attack on the established powers of Europe. They take aim at the sterile, circular arguments of the university philosophers, who are still obsessed with a godless and cursed Aristotle. They mock the impostors and caterpillars who practice a false alchemy, seeking only worldly gold instead of the spiritual gold of wisdom and healing. But their most venomous attack, the one that would make them mortal enemies of the established order, is saved for Rome. In a move of breathtaking audacity, the Confessio directly names the Pope as the Antichrist, whose final fall is at hand, and whose ass's braying will be silenced forever. In the feverish political climate of pre-30 Years' War Germany, this was not just a theological statement. It was a declaration of war. It placed the Rosicrucian project squarely in the camp of the most radical Protestant reformers. It told the world in no uncertain terms where the battle lines were drawn. Having laid out the cosmic stakes, the Confessio concludes not with a gentle invitation, but with a powerful ultimatum. It warns the world that a new sun is rising, and those who cling to the old darkness will be blinded by its light. It offers humanity a choice. They can accept the truth offered by the Brotherhood, a truth that will bring truth, light, life, and glory, or they can reject it and be cast aside with the dying world of falsehood and corruption. We have, they write, no treasure of gold or silver, but that which is far more excellent. They offer wisdom. They offer a transformed world. But they warn that this offer is for a limited time only. The clock is ticking. The final reformation is coming with or without you. The Confessio Fraternitatis transformed the Rosicrucian mystery from a curious legend into a revolutionary movement. It gave the invisible brotherhood a voice, and that voice was angry, prophetic, and utterly uncompromising. It ignited a firestorm of debate. But even as the world was reeling from this second text, the anonymous authors prepared their third and final revelation. And this one would be the strangest of them all. In 1616, the third book of the Rosicrucian trilogy appeared. It was titled The Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz. And if the Fama was a history, and the Confessio a manifesto, the Chemical Wedding was something else entirely. It was a dream, a sprawling, 7-day, allegorical romance, teeming with a density of symbolism that has baffled scholars for 400 years. The book presents itself as an autobiography, written by Christian Rosenkreuz himself. But this is not the globe-trotting young seeker of the Fama. This is an old man, preparing for Easter, meditating in his hermitage. The narrative begins on the eve of the festival, when a furious storm rages outside. In the midst of the tempest, he feels a pull on his coat. He turns to find a fair and glorious dame, with great wings full of eyes, holding a golden trumpet and a bundle of letters. She hands him one. It is sealed with a cross and bears the inscription, In hoc signo vinces. In this sign, you will conquer. It is an invitation to a royal wedding. The story that follows is a descent into a world governed by a kind of dream logic. It is a psychedelic tapestry woven from the threads of alchemy, astrology, Christian mysticism, and Arthurian romance. The 7 days of the wedding correspond to the 7 stages of the alchemical great work, the process of turning base matter into golder, allegorically, the impure soul into a state of enlightened perfection. On the first day, Rosenkreuz embarks on his journey. He navigates a landscape of cryptic choices, choosing between 4 different paths, each with its own promise and peril. He arrives at a magnificent castle, but entry is not guaranteed. On the second day, the trials begin. The guests, including Rosenkreuz, are gathered in a great hall. A golden fleece is hung, and the guests are ceremonially weighed upon a set of great scales. Many are found wanting. They are too heavy with worldly ambition or too light with frivolous ignorance. They are scourged and driven from the castle in shame. Rosenkreuz and a few others are deemed worthy. They have passed the first test of initiation. The third and fourth days are a whirlwind of spectacle and shocking tragedy. The chosen guests are shown the wonders of the castle. A library of secret knowledge, a fountain guarded by a lion, automaton servants who attend to their every need. They are treated to a theatrical play that allegorically recounts the history of the world. And then comes the centerpiece of the entire narrative. In a grim and solemn ceremony, the young king and queen, along with several other royal figures, are beheaded with a black axe. Their blood is collected in a golden goblet, and their bodies are placed in black coffins. This is the nigredo of alchemy, the black stage. It is the necessary putrefaction, the death of the old self, the dissolution of matter before it can be reborn in a higher form. For the reader, it is a moment of profound shock and confusion. The 5th and 6th days are dedicated to the alchemical resurrection. The process is a miracle of mystical science. Rosenkreutz and the other initiates are led to a great 7-story tower, an observatory of the soul. There, they must assist in the great work. They witness the bodies being treated, the blood being distilled in strange glass apparatuses. The very essence of the slain royals is separated, purified, and slowly recombined. They create a homunculus, a tiny, perfectly formed being, which is fed with the purified blood until it grows back into the resurrected king and queen. This is the albedo and rubdo, the white and red stages, the purification and the final perfection. The royal couple is reborn, more glorious than before. On the 7th and final day the work is complete. Rosenkreutz, for his faithful service, is made a Knight of the Golden Stone. He has achieved the goal. He is an adept. But the story ends on a note of strange, personal ambiguity. As a final duty, the new knights are assigned to be gatekeepers of the castle. Rosenkreutz, in a moment of curiosity, records his own name and a few other details on a tablet, a minor act of ego. For this small transgression, he is sentenced to remain as the gatekeeper, while the others are free to depart. His own wedding, his final union, is delayed. The book ends with him alone, waiting. What can we possibly make of such a story? Unlike the Fama and the Confessio, the chemical wedding is not concerned with social reform or public proclamations. It is a roadmap of the inner path. The wedding is the alchemical marriage of the human soul to the divine. The trials, the beheading, the resurrection in the tower, it is all a grand, complex allegory for the process of spiritual transformation, the difficult and often terrifying journey of purifying the self to achieve union with God. Together, these 3 texts formed a complete, self-contained, and utterly compelling universe. They were a work of genius. The Fama Fraternitatis provided the mythos, the historical legend, the heroic founder, the anchor in time that made it all feel real. The Confessio Fraternitatis provided the logos, the philosophical argument, the political challenge, the urgent call to action that demanded a response. And the chemical wedding provided the pathos, the inner journey, the allegorical path, the personal spiritual map for the individual seeker. They appealed to every kind of discontented mind in Europe. To the scholar, they offered a new universal science. To the revolutionary, they offered a plan to overthrow a corrupt order. And to the mystic, they offered a direct path to God. They created a perfect intellectual and spiritual trap. And through it all, as Europe began to seethe with debate, as responses and accusations flew from the printing presses, the authors themselves remained completely, stubbornly silent. They had unleashed their trilogy, their call from the invisible upon the world. And now, they fell back into the shadows to watch what would happen. They had created a fraternity that was everywhere and nowhere, and now they too had become ghosts. The stage was set. The call had been made. The question now was, how would a world stumbling toward its most devastating war respond to the strange and beautiful dream of reformation? An idea is like a seed, can lay dormant for 1,000 years, waiting for it to sprout, to flourish, to consume the imagination of a continent. It needs more than just a storyteller. It needs the right soil. It needs a world that is a world that is hungry, and perhaps a world that is desperate. The Rosicrucian Manifestus Fama, the Confessio, and the chemical wedding did not appear in a vacuum. They were the lightning flash that illuminates a dark and stormy landscape. To understand why these strange, anonymous little books caused such a massive stir, why they were met with such fervent belief and such furious condemnation, we must understand the world into which they were born. We must understand the unique and volatile intellectual, technological, and political climate of the early 17th century. It was an age of profound contradictions, a crucible where old worlds were dying and new ones were struggling to be born. It was an age of secrets and of upheaval, and it was the perfect soil for a beautiful, dangerous dream. The first element of this fertile ground was intellectual. The world was drunk on new, or rather newly rediscovered, ideas. The Renaissance had kicked open the dusty doors of the medieval mind, and a flood of ancient knowledge, long lost to Western Europe, came pouring in. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 had sent Greek-speaking scholars fleeing west, carrying with them a treasure trove of classical texts. Chief among these was a collection of writings attributed to a legendary Egyptian sage named Hermes Trismegistus, Hermes, the thrice greatest. The Corpus Hermeticum, as it became known, was believed to be a pristine, uncorrupted record of the ancient Egyptian religion, a divine revelation that predated even Moses. Though we now know these texts were written much later, in the early centuries of the Common Era, to a 15th century scholar like Marsilio Ficino, who translated them in Florence, they were the voice of a lost golden age. This Hermetic philosophy was intoxicating. It taught that man was not a fallen creature, groveling in a world of sin. Man was a microcosm, a universe in miniature. He contained within himself the entirety of creation. The famous Hermetic axiom, as above, so below, meant that the laws governing the heavens were the same laws governing the human soul. To understand yourself was to understand the universe. And more radically, to purify and perfect yourself was to gain the power to influence the universe. Man could become a magus, a divine operator, a co-creator with God. This single idea revitalized and gave profound spiritual meaning to a whole ecosystem of secret sciences. Consider alchemy. In the popular imagination, the alchemist is a greedy charlatan, obsessively trying to turn lead into gold. And certainly, there were many such puffers, as they were called. But for the serious practitioner, the adept, alchemy was a spiritual discipline. The physical transmutation of metals was merely an outward sign, a proof of a much deeper, inner transformation. The lead was the alchemist's own impure, chaotic soul. The gold was the perfected, enlightened soul, unified with the divine spirit. The laboratory furnace was a physical mirror of the spiritual furnace within. Thinkers like the revolutionary Swiss physician Paracelsus, a towering figure of the 16th century, had already begun this reinterpretation. He rejected the ancient medicine of Galen and argued that alchemy was the true key to healing. For Paracelsus, the purpose of alchemy was not to make gold, but to prepare medicines, to distill the pure, healing essence, the virtue from plants and minerals. This was a holy art, a way of redeeming fallen nature to serve man, just as Christ had redeemed fallen humanity. This blend of medicine, spirituality, and chemistry was a direct precursor to the Rosicrucian promise to cure the sick, and that gratis. Alongside Hermeticism and alchemy, there was the Kabbalah. This ancient tradition of Jewish mysticism offered a map of creation itself. It taught that the Hebrew language was no mere alphabet, but the very building blocks of reality. The names of God, the structure of the scriptures, the 10 divine emanations known as the Sephiroths were the keys to understanding the hidden architecture of the cosmos. Christian thinkers of the Renaissance, like Pico della Mirandola, became fascinated by it. They created a Christian Kabbalah, believing that this Jewish mystical tradition held the secret keys to proving the divinity of Christ and unlocking the deepest mysteries of their own faith. It promised a way to read what the Rosicrucians would later call the Book of Nature, to see God's signature written into the fabric of the world. Hermeticism, alchemy, Kabbalah. This was the holy trinity of the Renaissance esoteric underground. They formed a powerful counter-narrative to the dry, rigid scholasticism taught in the official universities. They offered a path to knowledge that was personal, experiential, and spiritual. This was the secret philosophy that simmered beneath the surface of European life, a river of hidden knowledge passed between masters and pupils, in secret societies and through coded manuscripts. It was an intellectual world already primed to believe in a hidden brotherhood of wise adepts. The second element, the accelerator that would turn this intellectual ferment into a raging fire, was technological. One invention changed the rules of the game forever: the printing press. Before Johannes Gutenberg perfected movable type in the mid-15th century, ideas moved at the speed of a scribe's hand. Books were precious objects, chained to desks in monasteries and royal libraries. Knowledge was a fortress, controlled by the gatekeepers of the church and the universities. An idea could take decades, even centuries, to cross the continent. The printing press shattered that fortress. It was the great democratizer of thought. Suddenly, an idea conceived by an anonymous author in a small German town could be replicated thousands of times and distributed across Europe in a matter of months. It allowed for the creation of a public sphere, a continent-wide conversation happening in near real time. It was an engine of revolution, and it had already powered the Protestant Reformation, carrying Martin Luther's theses from a single church door to every corner of the Holy Roman Empire. The Rosicrucian manifestos were a direct product of this new media landscape. They were designed for this world of cheap print and rapid dissemination. They were, in essence, one of history's first viral marketing campaigns. The author's anonymity, the untraceable nature of the pamphlets, their ability to appear as if from nowhere, all of this was made possible by the press. It was the perfect tool for a ghost to speak to the world. But the third and most crucial element, the one that lent the Rosicrucian promise its desperate life-or-death urgency, was the political and religious climate. The early 17th century was not an age of hope. It was an age of profound, bone-deep anxiety. Europe was a powder keg, and the fuse was burning short. The wound of the Protestant Reformation had never healed. The religious unity of medieval Christendom was shattered beyond repair, replaced by a patchwork of hostile, mutually intolerant faiths. The century that followed Luther had been one of almost constant savage warfare. For the people living through it, this was not an abstract theological dispute. It was a lived reality of persecution, rebellion, and massacre. The question of how to properly worship God was a matter of state security, and your neighbor's piety could be a death sentence. By the early 1600s, This tension had reached a fever pitch, particularly in the German-speaking lands of the Holy Roman Empire. The empire was a volatile mosaic of hundreds of small states, some fiercely Catholic, others staunchly Protestant. A fragile peace held, but both sides were arming themselves, forming military alliances, and waiting for the inevitable spark that would ignite the final, apocalyptic confrontation. This was an age steeped in prophecy. Preachers and astrologers alike saw signs of the end times everywhere. In comets, in strange births, in political omens. Many believed that the great struggle between the Pope the Antichrist to the Protestants and the true forces of Christ was at hand. They expected a final, world-cleansing cataclysm, followed by the dawn of a new age. This was the world that read the Rosicrucian manifestos. Imagine you are a scholar in Heidelberg or Prague in 1615. Your world is tearing itself apart. The call from the invisible had been sent. The trilogy of Rosicrucian manifestus mythic Fama, the apocalyptic Confessio, and the allegorical chimical wedding was now loose in the world. It was a message in a bottle, cast into the turbulent waters of 17th century Europe. And Europe, it turned out, was listening with an astonishing intensity. The result was not a quiet intellectual debate. It was a firestorm, a continent-wide frenzy of publication and speculation that historians have come to call the Rosicrucian furor. The anonymous authors had asked for those with sincere interest to make themselves known, and the response was overwhelming. It was a torrent of hope, faith, accusation, and ridicule. A great shout was sent out towards the supposed location of the Sanctus Spiritus. But the defining feature of this historical moment, the thing that makes it so strange and so haunting, is what happened next. In response to this great shout, there came back only an echo from a profound and unnerving void. Between roughly 1614 and 1625, hundreds of texts responding to the Rosicrucian call were published. It was a literary explosion, a conversation carried out in public between a vast, desperate audience and a silent, invisible source. These responses can be broadly sorted into two major camps, two opposing armies in a war of words being fought over a phantom. First, there were the supplicants. These were the true believers, the men who read the manifestos not as a fiction or an allegory, but as a literal promise. They were doctors, alchemists, theologians, poets, and mystics who saw in the Brotherhood the fulfillment of their deepest aspirations. And they did exactly what the Fama had asked them to do. They published their responses, their hearts laid bare on the printed page for all the world, and they hoped for the Brotherhood to see. These publications are fascinating and often deeply moving documents. They are, in essence, job applications for a position in a divine secret society. A man named Adam Hasselmayr, a notary and follower of Paracelsus, was one of the very first. He was so convinced of the manifesto's truth that he proclaimed their arrival to be the dawn of a new age, a revelation on par with the Bible itself. For his troubles, he was arrested by the Jesuits and sentenced to the galleys, becoming, in a sense, the first martyr for a cause whose leaders he had never met. A German physician named Theophilus Schweigert published a work titled Mirror of the Wisdom of the Rosicrucians, complete with fantastical engravings of their invisible castle. A castle he imagined as a fortress of the spirit, floating in the clouds, reachable only by the pure of heart. He and others like him didn't just believe in the Brotherhood. They began to build its world, to illustrate its philosophy, to elaborate on its myth before receiving any further instruction. Two figures, however, stand out as the most significant and prolific defenders of the Rosy Cross. They would become the unsolicited public relations department for the Invisible Order. The first was the English physician and philosopher Robert Fludd. Fludd was a colossal intellect, a true Renaissance man who stood at the crossroads of science and magic. He was a respected fellow of the Royal College of Physicians, but his true passion was the Hermetic philosophy of the microcosm and macrocosm. He saw the entire universe as a divine musical instrument, a monochord strung between heaven and earth, and believed he could chart its harmonies. When the Rosicrucian manifestos reached England, Fludd recognized his own worldview in them. He was convinced they were genuine. When accusations began to fly that the Brotherhood was a diabolical conspiracy, Fludd took it upon himself to defend them. He published massive, lavishly illustrated volumes, like his Apologia Compendiaria, a brief apology for the fraternity. In these books, he argued passionately that the Rosicrucians' magic was not demonic sorcery, but a holy, divine science, a continuation of the ancient wisdom of Hermes and Plato. He became their greatest champion, their most eloquent defender. But he also admitted, with a telling honesty, that he had never met a single member. He knew of them, he wrote, only by their fame. The second great defender was the German physician and alchemist Michael Meyer. If Fludd was the grand theorist, Meyer was the tireless investigator. He had served as physician to the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II in his famously occult-obsessed court in Prague. Meyer was a devoted alchemist who traveled all over Europe in search of genuine esoteric knowledge. When he encountered the manifestos, he became obsessed. He saw the Rosicrucian story as a beautiful allegory for the alchemical great work. He dedicated the rest of his life and his considerable fortune to defending the Brotherhood and explicating its secrets. He published book after book, like Silentium Post Clamors, Silence After the Cries, and Themis Aurea, The Golden Law, dissecting the manifesto's symbolism and arguing for their profound truth. He traveled to England specifically to discuss the matter with Robert Fludd. These two men, the greatest proponents of the Rosy Cross, formed a kind of brotherhood of their own, united in their defense of an order that refused to speak to them. Meyer's quest, his desperate search for the real, physical brothers, would ultimately lead him nowhere. He spent his fortune, and died in 1622, still waiting for a sign. For every supplicant there was an accuser, for every defender a detractor. The established powers of Europe, particularly the churches, saw the Rosicrucian phenomenon not as a promise, but as a terrifying threat. The Catholic Church, through its powerful Jesuit order, led the charge. They saw the Brotherhood's anti-papal rhetoric, its claims of secret knowledge, and its allegiance to an authority higher than the Pope as the very definition of a diabolical heresy. They churned out pamphlets condemning the cacomagicians, the evil sorcerers of the Rosy Cross, linking them to Luther, to witchcraft, and to every subversive current of the age. For them, an invisible society was the perfect vehicle for Satan's work, a conspiracy that could rot the foundations of Christendom from within. But the criticism wasn't limited to Catholics. Mainstream Lutheran theologians were also deeply unnerved. The Rosicrucians' strange blend of Christianity with Hermeticism, magic, and alchemy was deeply heretical to their doctrine of salvation through faith alone. To them, the manifestos were the work of dangerous enthusiasts, fanatics who were leading people away from the simple truth of the gospel and into a labyrinth of blasphemous speculation. And then there were the rationalists and satirists. Men like the aforementioned Gabriel Naud in France and Andreas Libavius, a German chemist who, while a believer in alchemy, found the claims of the Fama to be ludicrous and unsupported. They attacked the legend on logical grounds, pointing out the historical impossibilities in the story of Christian Rosenkreuz, the lack of any external evidence, and the sheer absurdity of a secret society announcing itself with public posters. They concluded, quite reasonably, that it was all a ludibrium, a game, a prank, a hoax. So Europe was locked in this furious debate. The supplicants pleaded. The defenders rationalized. The accusers condemned. The satirists mocked. Everyone was talking about the Rosicrucians. But no one was talking to them. Because through all of this, the Brotherhood itself remained utterly, profoundly, maddeningly silent. This is the central mystery, the hollow core around which the entire furor revolves. Adam Hasselmayr went to the galleys for them, and they were silent. Michael Meyer spent his life and fortune searching for them, and they were silent. Robert Fludd wrote titanic volumes in their defense, and they were silent. Their enemies accused them of being in league with the devil, and they offered no rebuttal. Their friends begged for a sign, and no sign was given. No one who wrote a public letter ever received a public reply. No one who pleaded for initiation was ever openly welcomed. The deputies who had supposedly taken up a visible and invisible stay in Paris never checked out of their invisible hotel. This silence was a work of psychological genius, whether intended or not. It created a perfect vacuum that believers rushed to fill with their own hopes and desires. Their invisibility was not seen as a sign of their non-existence, but as proof of their incredible spiritual advancement. Their silence was not interpreted as absence, but as a sign of their profound wisdom. They were above the petty squabbles of the world. They were operating on a higher plane. Every attempt to debunk them could be turned on its head. If a skeptic like Descartes searched for them and found nothing, it only proved that his intentions were not pure enough. He was merely curious, as the second Paris placard had warned. His failure was his own, not theirs. It was a flawless, unfalsifiable system. But even the most fervent hope cannot survive forever on a diet of pure silence. As the years wore on, and as the political situation in Germany spiraled downwards into the horrific violence of the 30 Years' War, the dream began to curdle. The promised universal reformation did not arrive. The invisible brothers did not emerge from the shadows to heal the sick and stop the slaughter. The ever-burning lamp in the vault offered no light to a continent plunging into darkness. The silence began to feel less like profound wisdom and more like profound absence. The furor died down, not with a bang, but with a slow, weary sigh of disillusionment. The great shout into the void had produced only an echo, and as the echo faded, people were left alone again with their troubles. The question, then, had to be asked. If the Brotherhood was a phantom, If the call had come from a non-existent source, then who had written the manifestos? Who had perpetrated this magnificent, world-altering deception? Was it all, as the skeptics claimed from the start, just a joke? The search for the real Rosicrucians was a dead end. The search for the authors, however, would eventually lead to a small circle of brilliant, idealistic, and perhaps mischievous young men in a German university town. The echo faded. The furor subsided. The great mystery of the Rosicrucians, which had burned so brightly across Europe, seemed to have consumed itself, leaving behind only the cold ashes of unanswered questions. The Brotherhood had promised a reformation, but delivered only silence. They had announced their presence, only to vanish like a morning mist. For centuries, the identity of the authors remained as spectral as the Brotherhood itself. Was it a genuine, ancient society that decided to retreat from the world? Was it a political conspiracy that failed? Or was it something else entirely? The key to this puzzle lies not in a magical vault in the earth, but in a far more mundane and accessible place. The archives of a German university and the troubled conscience of one brilliant man. Modern scholarship, through careful textual analysis and historical detective work, has largely converged on a single source for the Rosicrucian manifestos. The trail leads us to the Protestant University of Tübingen in the Duchy of Württemberg, and to a close-knit circle of bright, idealistic, and deeply engaged young Lutheran theologians and scholars who were active there in the early 1600s. And at the heart of this circle stands a fascinating and conflicted figure, Johann Valentin Andrea. Johann Valentin Andrea was a Wunderkind, a product of Germany's intellectual elite. His grandfather, Jacob Andrea, was a major figure in the Protestant Reformation. His father was a respected Lutheran pastor and alchemist. From a young age, Andrea was immersed in a world of both orthodox theology and esoteric speculation. He was a polymathic gifted theologian, a sharp-witted satirist, a mathematician, a playwright, and a utopian thinker. His personal coat of arms, granted to his family long before the manifestos appeared, even featured a St. Andrew's cross with 4 roses in its quadrants, a striking coincidence that seems almost too perfect to be true. At Tübingen, Andrea was part of a circle of like-minded friends, including Tobias Hess, a Paracelsian doctor, Christoph Besold, a legal scholar with a deep interest in Kabbalah, and others. This was a group of young idealists, passionate about their Lutheran faith but also deeply critical of the state of their world. They were dismayed by the endless, bitter infighting between Christian denominations. They were frustrated by the stale, rigid scholasticism that dominated university philosophy, and they were alarmed by the rising tide of pseudo-chemists, charlatans, and occult fanatics who promised easy answers and magical treasures, preying on the gullible. They dreamed of a true reformation, not just a theological one, but a universal one, encompassing science, education, ethics, and society itself. They dreamed of a world guided by Christian charity, intellectual honesty, and a spirit of joyful, collaborative inquiry. And it appears that, in the creative ferment of their youth, they decided to act. Not through direct political action, but through a far more subtle and dangerous game. They decided to create a fiction. The prevailing theory, pieced together over centuries, is that the Rosicrucian manifestos began as a ludibrium. This is a crucial Latin word, one that Andrea himself would use later in life when hinting at his involvement. A ludibrium can mean a game, a jest, a trifle, or, more pointedly, a mockery. The Tübingen Circle, steeped in the esoteric literature of the day, likely concocted the legend of Christian Rosenkreuz and his brotherhood as a grand, elaborate satire. It was a parody designed to hold up a mirror to their age. They created the perfect, ideal secret society, the one that every credulous mystic and wonder-seeker was dreaming of. Think of the Elements, a founder with a comically perfect allegorical name, Christian Rosecross, a fantastic journey to a mythical city of wise men, a secret vault that is a pastiche of every magical trope. They packed the story with every element their contemporaries craved, turning the dial up to 11. They essentially built the ultimate intellectual mousetrap, baiting it with the promise of secret knowledge. They built a beautiful house of cards and waited for the world to see its elegant absurdity, to laugh at its own credulity, and perhaps, in doing so, to reflect on what a true reformation might actually look like. But a strange and powerful thing happened. The world didn't laugh. It believed. The joke took on a life of its own. The satire was mistaken for a sermon. The ludibrium was received as a divine revelation. Instead of provoking laughter and self-reflection, the fama provoked a massive, earnest, and deeply serious public response. Sincere scholars like Flood and Marr dedicated their lives to defending the fiction. Powerful institutions like the Catholic Church dedicated their resources to fighting it. The Tübingen Circle had intended to lampoon the desperate search for secrets, and in doing so, had accidentally created the most compelling secret society in modern history. One can only imagine their reaction. A mixture of exhilaration, shock, and dawning horror. Their clever prank had escaped their control. It was now a major European phenomenon, debated in the courts of kings and the halls of universities. What were they to do? To step forward and confess it was all just a joke was now unthinkable. It would bring down upon them the wrath of all sides. They would be ridiculed by the scholars they had fooled and condemned as heretical fraudsters by the churches they had provoked. In an age of heresy trials and religious warfare, such a confession could be a death sentence. And so, faced with the whirlwind they had unleashed, they chose the only safe option available to them. They chose silence. They let the rumor run its course, watching from the sidelines as their fictional creation took on a vibrant, independent life. Years later, in his own autobiography, Andrea would all but confess to writing the most surreal of the texts, The Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosicrucians. He describes it as a work of his youth, a piece of fiction filled with useless curiosity and puerile games. He dismisses it as a ludibrium, a trifle he wrote long ago. But the damage or the magic was already done. He never explicitly admitted to the fama or the confessio, but the stylistic and thematic links, combined with his coy allusions, make his circle's authorship the most plausible explanation we have. But to call it just a joke is to do a profound disservice to the project. It misses the deeper purpose, the earnest heart beating within the satirical shell. It was a joke with a soul. Because even if the Brotherhood of the Rosy Cross was a fiction, the ideals presented in the manifestos were completely genuine. Andrea and his friends were not cynical nihilists. They were passionate Christian reformers. They truly did believe in the need for a universal reformation. They genuinely longed for a world where science and faith worked in harmony, where knowledge was used for charity and healing, not for personal gain, and where the bitter, bloody conflicts between Christians could be replaced by a fellowship of mutual love and respect. They created a fictional utopia to critique a real dystopia. They used a lie to tell a deeper truth. This is the beautiful paradox of the Rosicrucian manifestos. The vehicle, the story of CRC and his secret brotherhood, was a fiction, a prank, a ludibrium. But the cargo it carried, the call for a new, more enlightened, more charitable world, was offered with the utmost sincerity. The pranksters, it turned out, were also prophets. Later in his life, Andrea would try to channel the energy his prank had unleashed into more practical projects. He wrote other utopian works, like his Christianopolis, which described an ideal city of learned Christians living in a community dedicated to science, art, and piety. It was, in many ways, the Rosicrucian ideal made explicit and practical, stripped of its esoteric secrecy. He tried to form real-life Christian unions and societies to put these ideals into practice. It was as if he spent the rest of his life trying to make the promise of his youthful fiction a reality. The original Rosicrucian Brotherhood may have been born as a jest in a university common room, but it spoke so powerfully to the hopes and fears of its age that it became real in its effects. It became an idea that was now independent of its creators, a free-floating dream that would go on to have a strange and remarkable afterlife, influencing the very course of Western thought in ways its authors could never have intended. The sleepy tale told by a few German students was about to wake up and change the world. A story can be like a ghost. It can pass through the world without a physical body, leaving no material trace of its existence. But sometimes, a ghost can cast a very real shadow. Sometimes, a fiction can have consequences that are more solid, more lasting, and more world-changing than any literal truth. The original Brotherhood of the Rosy Cross, the secret society dreamed up by the Tübingen Circle, faded back into the mists of legend from which it came. It was a sleepy tale, a prank with a soul that had run its course. But the idea it had set loose in the world was now wide awake. The idea of a collaborative, international brotherhood of learned individuals, dedicated to advancing knowledge not for personal glory or political power, but for the universal good of all humanity. This idea was too powerful to die. It did not die. It simply shed its mystical skin, adapted, and changed its name. The dream of the Rosicrucians, a secret college of philosopher-magicians, would soon metamorphose into something new. It would become the invisible college of the natural philosophers. And it would, in a strange and roundabout way, help give birth to the modern scientific world. The intellectual energy of the Rosicrucian Führer found its most fertile new ground across the English Channel. And here, its greatest amplifier was a man who may be the single most important figure in the philosophy of science, Sir Francis Bacon. Bacon was a lawyer, a statesman, and Lord Chancellor of England. He was a man of immense intellect and ambition, and he was deeply dissatisfied with the state of human knowledge. Like the Rosicrucian authors, he was scathing in his critique of the sterile, logic-chopping philosophy of the universities, which he believed had produced nothing but endless debate for centuries. Knowledge, Bacon argued, should be practical. It should be experimental. Its goal should be the relief of man's estate, the conquest of nature for the betterment of human life. Bacon never mentioned the Rosicrucians by name in his major works, though do so would have been politically dangerous, associating himself with a group condemned as heretics and conspirators. But it is almost impossible to believe he was unaware of them. The Führer was at its peak during the height of his career, and his final unfinished work, a utopian novel published posthumously in 1626, reads like a direct, pragmatic response to the Rosicrucian dream. The book was called The New Atlantis. It describes a voyage to a mythical, isolated island called Bensalem. The sailors are rescued by the island's inhabitants, who are wise, pious, and technologically advanced beyond anything seen in Europe. The source of their prosperity and peace, the sailors learn, is not a secret magical brotherhood, but a state-sponsored institution of scientists called Salomon's House. Bacon's description of Salomon's House is a blueprint for the modern research university. It is an organized, collaborative, and publicly funded institution dedicated to the systematic investigation of nature. It has deep caves for studying geology, high towers for observing the weather, botanical gardens for acclimating new plants, and laboratories for every conceivable experiment. The fathers of Salomon's House are not mystics who receive knowledge through divine revelation. They are researchers. They have a division of intellectual labor. Some travel the world gathering data, some conduct experiments, some analyze the results, and others formulate general laws. Their goal, as one of the fathers explains, is the knowledge of causes and secret motions of things, and the enlarging of the bounds of human empire to the effecting of all things possible. This was the Rosicrucian ideal translated into a new language. The secrecy of the Rosicrucians is transformed into the organized collaboration of Salomon's House. The magical powers of Christian Rosenkreuz are replaced by the methodical power of the experimental method. The charitable goal of healing the sick for free is institutionalized as a public mission to improve human life. Bacon had taken the beautiful, hazy dream of the German manifestos and given it a clear, practical, and potent structure. He had provided the world with a vision of how the universal reformation might actually be achieved. Bacon's vision was electrifying. It captured the imagination of a new generation of English thinkers, men who were weary of the religious and civil strife that was tearing their own country apart during the English Civil War. During the 1640s and 1650s, a group of these natural philosophers began meeting in London and Oxford. They were men like John Wilkins, a clergyman and inventor, and most notably, a brilliant young Anglo-Irish aristocrat named Robert Boyle. Boyle, who would later become known as the father of modern chemistry, explicitly referred to their informal network of correspondents and collaborators as the Invisible College. The term had been floating around intellectual circles, likely originating from the Rosicrucian idea of an unseen brotherhood, but Boyle and his companions gave it a new, Baconian meaning. Their Invisible College was not a mystical order, but a fellowship of experimentalists, committed to sharing their findings, debating their theories, and pursuing knowledge according to the new, empirical methods. They were a living, breathing Salomon's House in miniature, operating in the shadows of a nation at war. When the chaos of the Civil War ended and the monarchy was restored in 1660, this Invisible College was ready to step into the light. With the support of King Charles II, a monarch with a keen personal interest in science, their informal group was granted a royal charter in 1662. The Invisible College was made manifest. It was given a name and a permanent home. It became the Royal Society of London for Improving Natural Knowledge. Its founding members were the very men who had formed the Invisible College: Boyle, Wilkins, and others like them, including a young, fiercely brilliant, and difficult architect and scientist named Robert Hooke, and a quiet Cambridge professor who would one day join their ranks and change the world forever, Isaac Newton. The thread is direct and unmistakable. A fictional German secret society inspires a dream of universal reformation. This dream is given a practical blueprint by Francis Bacon in The New Atlantis. This blueprint inspires a group of English experimentalists to form an Invisible College. And this Invisible College receives a royal charter and becomes the Royal Society, arguably the single most important scientific institution of the 17th century, a cornerstone of the scientific revolution. This does not mean that the mystical element vanished overnight. The transition from Rosicrucian magic to Royal Society science was not a clean break. The early history of science is far stranger and more complex than we often imagine. Many of these founding fathers of the new reason still had one foot planted firmly in the old world of esotericism. Elias Ashmole, a founding member of the Royal Society, was a devoted alchemist, astrologer, and a voracious collector of magical texts. He was a Freemason and wrote extensively on the esoteric symbolism of the Order of the Garter. He was fascinated by the Rosicrucian legend and saw his scientific and esoteric pursuits as two sides of the same coin, two different paths to understanding God's creation. And then there is the giant, Sir Isaac Newton, We remember him as the supreme rationalist, the man who uncovered the universal laws of gravitation, motion, and optics with cold mathematical precision. But the public Newton, the president of the Royal Society, was only half the man. In private, Newton was a different creature entirely. For decades, he pursued alchemy with a secret, obsessive passion that bordered on madness. After his death, his archives were found to contain over 1 million words of writing on alchemy and radical, heretical theology. He pored over the same kinds of texts that had inspired the Rosicrucian authors, searching for the Prisca Sapientia, the pure, ancient wisdom he believed God had granted to the earliest humans and which had been lost or corrupted over time. He was searching for the philosopher's stone, the secret to transmutation, the divine language of nature. Newton, the architect of our modern, mechanical universe, was also perhaps the last of the great magicians, a solitary seeker chasing the same dream of universal knowledge that had been given its most popular form in the story of Christian Rosenkreuz. The sleepy tale of the Rosy Cross, the jest from Tübingen, had cast a very long and very solid shadow indeed. It had whispered a dream of a secret college dedicated to healing the world, and in a way that no one could have predicted, the world had listened. The mystical Reformation had not arrived, but in its place a scientific revolution had begun. Some stories never truly end. They simply go to sleep. They lie dormant in the soil of culture, waiting for a new season, a new climate, a new generation to rediscover them. The original Rosicrucian phenomenon, the 17th century furor sparked by a handful of anonymous texts, had burned itself out. The urgent hope for an imminent magical reformation had given way to the slow, methodical work of the scientific revolution. The ghost of Christian Rosenkreuz had retreated to the footnotes of history. But a name with such power, a legend so potent, could not stay buried forever. The Rosicrucian idea was too alluring, the symbol of the rose and the cross too beautiful and too mysterious, to be forgotten. The original brotherhood may have been a fiction, a phantom of the printed page, but the desire for such a brotherhood was real and enduring. And so, as the centuries passed, the name Rosicrucian would be reborn. Again and again it would be claimed, reinterpreted, and reshaped by new movements and new seekers. The sleepy tale would be retold in different languages, for different purposes, becoming a vessel for the esoteric dreams of each new era. The first significant revival occurred in the fertile ground of 18th century fraternalism. This was the great age of the secret society, and its undisputed champion was Freemasonry. As Masonic lodges spread across Europe and the Americas, their simple, craft-based rituals began to evolve. A desire for deeper symbolism and more profound historical lineage led to the creation of numerous high degrees or side rites that were layered on top of the basic structure of the lodge. It was here, within the elaborate and eclectic world of high-degree Freemasonry, that the Rose and Cross found a new home. In systems like the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite, a pivotal degree emerged, typically the 18th, known as the Knight of the Rose Croix. The rituals of this degree drew heavily on the symbolism of the original manifestos. They spoke of a search for a lost word, a form of divine truth. They incorporated the symbols of the rose, the cross, the pelican feeding its young with its own blood, and the eagle. The central theme was often a reinterpretation of the Christian story through a more universal, philosophical lens, the idea of a new law of love and enlightenment replacing an old law of dogma and fear. This was not a claim to be the original Rosicrucian fraternity. Rather, Freemasonry absorbed the Rosicrucian legend into its own vast and growing mythology. Christian Rosenkreuz became one more link in a supposed golden chain of ancient wisdom teachers, a lineage that Masonic lore sometimes traced back to the builders of King Solomon's Temple, the Knights Templar, and the sages of ancient Egypt. The historical mystery of the Rosicrucians was tamed, catalogued, and given a specific place within the structured, hierarchical world of the Masonic Lodge. The Phantom had been given a new, respectable uniform. The second, and perhaps most dramatic, rebirth occurred in the twilight of the 19th century. This was the era of the Great Occult Revival, a powerful reaction against the perceived soullessness of industrial age materialism and scientific rationalism. Spiritualism, theosophy, and a renewed interest in ceremonial magic swept across Europe. People were once again hungry for enchantment, for initiation, for a path to personal spiritual experience. And the name Rosicrucian was ready for its comeback. In 1866, a group of high-ranking English Freemasons, led by a man named Robert Wentworth Little, formed a new organization. They called it the Societas Rosicruciana in Anglia, or the Rosicrucian Society in England. This was an exclusive, scholarly body, open only to master masons. Their goal was to study the Rosicrucian mystery, along with Kabbalah, Hermeticism, and other strands of Western esotericism. They were historians and mystics, attempting to connect with the spirit, if not the direct lineage of the original brotherhood. But this society would become most famous for being the seedbed of something far more ambitious. Two of its most prominent members, William Wynne Westcott and Samuel Liddell MacGregor Mathers, claimed to have discovered a cryptic manuscript written in a cipher. This cipher manuscript, they alleged, contained the structural outline for the rituals of a genuine, ancient Rosicrucian order. Based on this dubious document and supposed contact with a secret German adept named Fräulein Sprengel, they founded, in 1888, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. The Golden Dawn was arguably the single most influential magical society of the modern era. It was a true magical academy, a university of the occult. It systematized the vast, chaotic currents of Western esotericism into a coherent, step-by-step curriculum of spiritual development. It blended the Rosicrucian mythos with practical Kabbalah, tarot divination, Enochian angel magic, and Egyptian symbolism. For the Golden Dawn, Christian Rosenkreutz was no mere metaphor. He was a historical chief of a secret order, a spiritual master whose lineage they were now restoring. Their inner, second order was called the Ordo Rosi Rubii Ori Crucis, the Order of the Red Rose and the Golden Cross. To be initiated into it was to become, in their eyes, a genuine Rosicrucian adept. This order would count among its members the poet W.B. Yeats, the actress Florence Farr, and the infamous Aleister Crowley, who would later take its teachings and twist them into his own darker system. The sleepy tale of the 17th century had been resurrected as a full-blown system of operative ritual magic. As the 20th century dawned, the Rosicrucian name would undergo its final and most public transformation. It would embrace the modern world of marketing, advertising, and mail-order correspondence. The chief architect of this change was an American advertising man and occultist named Harvey Spencer Lewis. Lewis was a brilliant showman and organizer. In 1915, in New York City, he founded the Antiquus Mysticus Ordo Rosicrucis, the ancient and mystical order of the Rosy Cross, better known today as a Mork. Lewis claimed to have been initiated into a genuine Rosicrucian lineage during a trip to Toulouse, France, and to have been given a charter to re-establish the order in North America. A Mork was different from its predecessors. It was not an exclusive, elite club for Freemasons or dedicated ceremonial magicians. It was for everyone. Lewis harnessed the power of modern media. He placed enticing advertisements in popular magazines like Popular Mechanics and the Saturday Evening Post. These ads promised to reveal the secret heritage and the mastery of life. They offered to teach the timeless wisdom of the pharaohs and the mystics to any sincere man or woman, right in their own home. For a monthly fee, subscribers received a series of printed monographs in the mail. These lessons covered a vast range of topics: cosmic consciousness, mystic healing, reincarnation, the development of psychic powers, and a sanitized, simplified version of alchemy and Kabbalah. The historical mystery of the Rosicrucians was transformed into a self-help curriculum, a home study course in mysticism. Amorc was and remains a global success, with its grand headquarters, Rosicrucian Park, in San Jose, California, complete with an Egyptian museum and a planetarium. And so, the name was reborn. But was it the same? These later groups, the Masonic Rose-Croix, the Golden Dawn, Amorc, and the many other smaller organizations that have used the name are all a legitimate part of the Rosicrucian story. But they are a different chapter. They are inheritors of the myth, not the original enigmatic phenomenon. The mystery of 17th century Rosicrucianism lies in its profound ambiguity, in its silence, in the tantalizing possibility that it was all an elaborate jest. The later revivals, by contrast, are defined by their certainty. They claim a direct lineage, a concrete history, a structured system of teaching, and a very visible organization. They provide answers where the original manifestos provided only questions. The name Rosicrucian had become a powerful, free-floating brand for a certain kind of Western mysticism. It became a vessel that could be filled with the ideas of any given era, the fraternalism of the Enlightenment, the high ritualism of the occult revival, or the democratic self-help ethos of the 20th century. The original Sleepy Tale had become a franchise, but in being reborn so many times, perhaps something of the original ghostly magic was lost. And so, after a journey of 400 years, a journey through secret manifestos, invisible colleges, sublime pranks, and scientific revolutions, who find ourselves back where we started, in the half-light, in the twilight zone between fact and fiction, history and myth. We are left with the one question that has haunted this entire story, the question that has echoed down the long corridors of Western esotericism. Were the Rosicrucians real? The answer, like the story itself, is not a simple yes or no. It is a paradox. It slips through your fingers the moment you try to grasp it, like trying to hold onto the substance of a dream upon waking. The answer depends entirely on what we mean by real. If by real, you mean a physical, historical secret society founded in the 15th century by a German nobleman named Christian Rosenkreutz, If you mean a tangible brotherhood of bachelors who discovered a magical, seven-sided vault containing an ever-burning lamp and the perfectly preserved body of their founder, then the answer, based on every piece of available evidence, is almost certainly no. There is not a single piece of credible, external evidence to support the historical existence of the fraternity as described in the Fama Fraternitatis. No contemporary chronicle outside of their own publications mentions them before 1614. No archaeological dig has ever unearthed the Sanctus Spiritus or its miraculous vault. The men who searched most desperately for them, like Michael Meyer, found nothing. The men who tried to debunk them, like René Descartes, also found nothing. The Rosicrucians of the manifestos are phantoms of the printed page, characters in a story. They are a fiction. But if by real, you mean influential, if you mean powerful, if you mean possessing the ability to fundamentally alter the dreams and the direction of a culture, then the answer is an emphatic, undeniable yes. In this sense, the Rosicrucians were more real and had a more lasting impact on the world than most actual historical secret societies could ever have hoped for. The Rosicrucians were an idea. They were a thought experiment that escaped the laboratory of a few German intellectuals and re-engineered the spiritual and intellectual landscape of an entire continent. They were a specter of hope in an age of utter despair, a rumor of a better world that became a catalyst for creating one. This is why we have called this a sleepy tale. The story of the Rosicrucians possesses the logic of a dream. In a dream, things can be both profoundly true and literally non-existent at the very same time. The emotions we feel in a dream are real. The insights we gain, the fears we confront, these are real experiences, even if the characters and settings that produce them dissolve into absurdity in the morning light. The dream isn't real, but its effect on us is. The original Rosicrucian Brotherhood was the dream. Its effect on the waking world was the scientific revolution. The story of the Rosicrucians is the story of a book, a myth, a joke, and a prayer, all rolled into one. It is the story of a whisper that became an echo that inspired a quiet revolution of the mind. They promised a magical universal reformation, and in a way that is layered with historical irony, they delivered one. Just not the one anyone expected. The immortal, alchemical masters who could speak all languages and heal any disease never showed up. They left a Europe on the brink of war to its fate. But the idea of them, the beautiful fiction of a collaborative, charitable, and enlightened brotherhood, inspired the very people who would begin to build a new world. Not through magic, but through method. Not through revelation, but through reason. Not through secrecy, but through the open exchange of information in societies like the one they inspired, the Royal Society. Perhaps this is the greatest secret of the Brotherhood of the Rosy Cross, the final punchline of the Divine Comedy written by Johann Valentin Andrea and his friends. Perhaps the treasure was never hidden in a vault. Perhaps the treasure was the call itself. The invitation to imagine a better world. The challenge to seek knowledge for its own sake, to heal the sick without thought of reward, to work for the betterment of humanity, not for gold or for glory, but in quiet, humble service. The manifestos told the world to wait for a group of wise masters to come and save them. But the subtext, the secret hidden in plain sight, may have been, stop waiting. The masters are not coming. You must become them yourselves. The original Rosicrucians remain as they first appeared on the walls of Paris. A tantalizing, unanswered question. A signature without a name. Promise from a ghost. A whisper on the wind that you can never be quite sure you really heard. And perhaps that is how it should be. Perhaps that is the source of their enduring power. Some stories are most powerful when they resist a final answer, when they maintain their ambiguity. They become a mirror, reflecting the hopes, fears, and beliefs of whoever peers into them. They force us to ask not just were they real, but why did so many people need them to be? The sleepy tale of the alchemists, mystics, and their invisible college is not, in the end, a story about a secret society. It is a story about the power of stories themselves. It is a testament to the profound and unpredictable ways that a single, well-told fiction can ignite the imagination, and in doing so, create a new reality. It is a reminder that sometimes, the most powerful forces in history are the ones we cannot see, and the most enduring legacies are those left by ghosts. Thank you for joining us on this journey into one of history's most beautiful and baffling mysteries. The story of the Rosicrucians is a reminder that the line between a collective dream and a historical event can be wonderfully, and sometimes dangerously, thin. What do you think? Was it all an elaborate intellectual prank, a genuine mystical movement that chose to remain hidden, or something else entirely? We would love to read your thoughts and theories in the comments below. If you enjoy these explorations into the strange backwaters of the past, please consider liking this video and subscribing to Driftwood Histories for more tales found adrift in time. We appreciate your support more than you know. Until next time, stay curious.